There's a story about the late Robert Kennedy, brother of President John F. Kennedy, that while he was out on the campaign trail in 1968, that the crowds, the scores of people pressing in on him would, at the end of a day, leave him with ripped cuffs and sleeves. Sometimes his arms underneath would be bloodied and bruised and scratched. So intent were the crowds to get close to Kennedy, to make eye contact with him, to reach out and to touch him. His enthusiasm, his charisma, it was so infectious, so mesmerizing that people would come from miles and miles and miles around just to see him and to hear him speak of his vision for life here in America, for what he thought needed to be done and what he pledged to do were he to become president. He exuded in the eyes of so many, in the hearts of so many, a charm, an honesty, a humility, a sincerity, and a power that many had not seen before. We have kind of a love-hate relationship with politicians, don't we? Especially in this day and age. Lots changed between 1968 and now. A lot hasn't. We love when we feel that the politicians in our society are speaking directly to us. When they are speaking right to our own desires and needs, when they are giving voice to, when they're making sense of our own concerns, our own feelings and circumstances. They get me, we say. We love when they rip into their opponents on the campaign trail, on the debate stage, wherever it may be, exposing hypocrisy, unraveling arguments. We love when they shine brightly with reflections of our own ideals and values, the kind that we feel will change the world for the better. But we also hate them sometimes too, don't we? We hate when they concede to their opponents. We hate when they concede to those that we would label as our own opponents, politically, socially, culturally, whatever. We hate when we feel that the politicians have been hypocritical themselves. We hate when their arguments are unraveled and the skeletons in their own closets are exposed and we feel like we have been had, we say. We have a love-hate relationship. We love those who display great power and prowess and carry with them the high esteem of those that we would love to align ourselves with. And we hate, or we at least shy away from, disassociate ourselves from those that we see as the weaker one, the figure who's weakest. Winners and losers, we call them. And who here likes being a loser? No one. Of course, it's not just national politics that has our number, is it? We align ourselves with all sorts of figures, locally and otherwise, as we say, that have pull around us, that have connections that can get things done. We might call it the Old Boys Club. You ever heard of that? And that's alive and well right here in our town, and God forbid, even in our houses of worship. Unfortunately, we see this happen far too often among clergy types, full confession. We see pastors and priests and preachers and rabbis and reverends and imams have a tendency to cozy up to those in positions of power. Those they feel can advance their own agendas, whether they be political agendas or theological, doctrinal, social, values-driven agendas, biblical or otherwise. But one thing ties all of these agendas together. Regardless of what party or what politician you happen to support or be a card-carrying member of, all of us likes power. We like to possess it. We like to be around it. We like to benefit from those who have power. And arguably, none of us likes being powerless, do we? To not have the reins in our own two hands, to have to rely on others to suffer indignities, whether they are real or perceived, to suffer indignities at the hands of others. How many of us likes that? It could be argued that power is seemingly the most important thing to us humans. Those who have it, those who don't, those who are seeking it, those who are seeking to keep it, those who wield it for their own gain, and those who employ it for the benefit of others. Power, power, power. And it's power that's at the center of our scriptures for this morning. Whether it's from the mouth of the prophet Jeremiah or on the scene in Luke's gospel, Jesus making his way through Galilee. In Jeremiah, we hear the prophet on behalf of God rail against the people, quoting nearly word for word the first psalm that Doreen read before our call to worship this morning. Jeremiah highlights the two ways of life, as we hear unfolded before us several times in the Scriptures. There's the way of the wicked that relies on its own power, its own strength, its own determination, its own sheer will, its own definitions of right and wrong and justice and so on. And there's the way of the righteous, who trust in God's power, in God's wisdom, in God's provision. Unless we begin to believe that the righteous are just simply more optimistic people than the wicked, thinking everything is eventually just going to work out in the end and that they'll give God all the credit when it does. I don't think that's the case. Optimism really isn't faith at all. We're not called just to be optimistic people in this world, are we? No. It's their hope that marks them as righteous. It's their trust in God, especially when things look the bleakest, that is considered righteous. It's their expectant looking to God and trusting in God and not themselves that gives them such a blessed identity as righteous. In Luke's gospel, we find Jesus making his way through Galilee on a whirlwind preaching and teaching and healing tour, followed by larger and larger and larger crowds pressing in upon him because of everything that they have seen, everything that they have heard about him and his power. Verse 19, it could very well read that everyone was wanting a piece of Jesus, because it was clear that he had the power to do everything they needed and wanted. It's Jesus' power that's so attractive to folks. So far in Luke's gospel, we have come to know that Jesus can heal sick mothers-in-law. that he can cleanse lepers, that he can heal the paralyzed, that he can restore mobility and strength to the broken and the weary, that he can drive out demons, that he can preach and teach with authority the likes of which no one else has seen. And then word gets out that someone is on the scene that can do for you everything you've longed for. He'll be in Lexington tomorrow, up by the Graustras. What are you going to do? Can I ride with you up to Lexington tomorrow? We're going to go see this guy. So the crowds go and they press in upon him like Bobby Kennedy, pressing in, grasping to simply touch him, to catch his eye, to receive some glimmer of recognition from him. Because they recognize where true power lies in this world. It is not with Caesar and his centurions. It is not with the religious folk telling them they just have to do X, Y, or Z. It is not with anyone or anything other than this man from Nazareth who, in his very words, his very deeds, his very presence, has revealed to all with ears to hear and eyes to see something that can only be described as the kingdom of God among us. And so turning to his disciples, to those who have been called and claimed and commissioned by this man from Nazareth to learn his ways, to reflect his will and way in this world in their very own lives, he drops a bombshell. Take everything you have learned up to this point. Take everything others have taught you up to this point about what seems to mark someone as blessed in this world, what seemingly makes one cursed in this world, and hurl it to the deepest, darkest, dankest, furthest reaches of the sea. Money, food, clothing, stuff that winds up in storage bins somewhere, living large and country club ways, cozying up with the powers and the authorities and the in crowd here and now. It's all rubbish. And it all leads to ruin. But the poor, the hungry, the weeping, and the grieving, and the mourning, and the tempest-tossed, the reviled, and the outcast, the ones who seem so powerless here and now, the ones folk never really want to associate with, these are the God-blessed ones. The ones I, says Jesus, will spend my time and my energy and my power on. It is to and in such as these who perceive where real power lies, whose lives have been laid low by the pretenders and the players of this world. It is to and in those who know that God's power, that God's kingdom is so different from the powers and the kingdoms of this world. It is to and in those who know that God's kingdom is so different from the ways of this world. That God's kingdom is made known and tangible and visible and present. And if we presume to call ourselves Jesus' disciples because this is a direct address to disciples, we hear, then our perspective, our focus, our attention needs to be turned toward the likes of those everything and everyone else tells us to turn away from in this world. You might say, take everything that makes you popular. Take everything that makes you privileged. Take everything that makes you prestigious and do the opposite. That's the upside down, countercultural ethic of God's kingdom that Jesus reveals in every step he takes in his life and his ministry, and that he trains us would-be disciples to reveal in our life and our ministry. But it all begins with the question, how drawn are we to power? And can we discern where real power comes from? Real power, God's power, the power to create worlds, to redeem lives, to forgive what we would call unforgivable in this life and world. This is a hard teaching, isn't it? I'm brought to tears just reading it, let alone having to preach to you on it. It is a hard teaching for us today, as it was for those in Jesus' day too, because how many of us have power in this room? Have money in the bank? Have friends that we can call upon when we're in need? Have folks who are in halls of power somewhere that we know? This is a message for us. And Jesus preaches it to us would-be disciples to give it to us as a corrective. A corrective for all of us disciples. A corrective, not a condemnation. I want to be clear on that. Because we can lose hope really quickly if we view this as nothing but a condemnation from Jesus' own mouths to those of us in this room who have power. He gives this to each and every one of us as a corrective so that we would not be lured by power and authority as this world would define it, but that we would recognize it. And instead of following it, would yoke ourselves to him, to the one who shows power through service to others, and the most of all, to service to the least of those among us. And who tells us that his power is made perfect in our weakness. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That you are not made righteous or good or holy or accepted by God because of what you do and the power that you can wield in this world, but because of what you cannot do and the power you don't have in this world. But the power that God, in love and in welcome, pours out on you in Jesus. Whether you recognize it or not, you are poor. You are in need. We are hungry and thirsty for this world to be made right, are we not? We can't do it. But by God, Jesus can. And we grasp and grope and long for and follow him. Because we know that by his grace and his power, we can in some very real way show this world what is right. That we can reject the pretenders and the players, even if that's what we see in the mirror, and turn to Him. Press in upon Him and not be cast off. But did you hear what happened when the crowds pressed in upon Him and just wanted to touch Him and be healed? What happened? Power came out from Him and healed them all. Align yourselves not with the powers of this world, friends, and those who promise that they alone can fix things. But align yourselves with the one who created all things in heaven and on earth, and who promises to make all things new, and the one who pours out His Spirit upon you so that you can reveal in your life His power, His grace, His glory, His mercy, His justice, His righteousness, His redemption, His love, His welcome, and His peace. Place your lives in His hands and let Him correct you and love you and lead you in His way of service. And may the grace of God be with you all. Like a low note, an undercurrent, leading you in this world so that you'd show the world the high notes of God's love and grace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.